This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the top 5 things that Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back teaches us are 2 podcasters and great friends of the show. First, let's bring in, from Teachers in the Dungeon and CWK Prover, Tom Gross.
Oh, well, hello, everybody. It's great to be on the big show. As always, Dan, thank you for having me on. And what a fun topic to talk about.
That's right. Well, we're going to talk about Star Wars and education, so we're going to have some educators. Our other guest is a burgeoning educator going back to school to be a teacher. We're very excited for him. He is also the host of the brand new sensational Colby Cast, Mr. Colby Mead.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me on the show. And when you told me about the subject, I thought, this will be easy. Empire Strikes Back, teachable moments. Not so much.
It's a really good challenge. We first did this for A New Hope in October of 2021, show 465. Craig Dickinson and Matt Leader joined me, the hosts of Reading Between the Reels, to talk about New Hope. So we're going to vary it up a little bit and have you two on. We're going to talk about The Empire Strikes Back and what it teaches us. This is, of course, a very exciting film, one of the most beloved in the entire Star Wars franchise, and all of cinema really since 1980. It's the one that has the ending where things go south, things go poorly, and there's no happy ending. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of things that they can teach us. So it's a great challenge I'm looking forward to. And Tom, we'll start with you.
Okay.
With your number 5.
All right. My number 5, I'm going to start on the dark side here. I think it's my only dark side moment, or I don't even know if it's a moment. It's more how we learn how power corrupts. And I guess where I'm thinking about that is, Vader has this ultimate power of the Force, but he also has influence over all of these commanders of the Empire, and he tosses them aside like nothing. I mean, how many generals or admirals does he just like chokehold for making a simple error? And so it sort of shows us, in 1980, when I was watching this, I don't know that this is something that I took from it, but looking at now the whole full story of Anakin, he is fully immersed in this corruption and this love of power. And when we are surrounded in that, we use it terribly. And I really feel like Empire is a good example of that. And it's a good lesson of that, all the way through this, Vader is so ruthless and everyone's afraid of him. I mean, and so we look at it and we just say, okay, he's completely in on this and he's using it terribly. And it actually ends, as you mentioned, Dan, this episode or this film ends dark. Everything's going Vader's way. In fact, he almost, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, he almost turns, the hope of the light of the Jedi to him. And so I'm going to go with my first moment is that power fully corrupts.
I like that. That's a really nice unconventional start, which is perfect because it's an unconventional movie. So that's a great way to kick it off. I like that approach, that angle. Colby, what about you? What is your number 5?
It hit me right after that high C of the Star Wars theme. As soon as the words come up and those familiar words start crawling up the screen, the first line says, "It's a dark time for the rebellion." And if you stop and think about it for a second, this is the sequel to A New Hope, where the rebellion just scored their greatest victory. And here we are starting this movie, and it's telling us it's a dark time for the rebellion. And then it goes on to say that they've been driven from their hidden base. They've been chased across the galaxy. And we aren't even 10 seconds into the movie. And it was a point that just was driven home to me that after a big win, be ready because the fight is not over and the challenges are about to be even worse. In other words, it's another level, another devil. You score a big victory,
Yeah.
and you're about to be challenged like you've never been before. So be ready.
Excellent. What a great way to
Wow.
look at that. A very
Nice.
positive way to look at it too. Be ready, be prepared. Speaking of that, that kind of ties in well to my number 5, I think, and I'm just going to snag this one. It's undoubtedly going to come up several times throughout the show, but my number 5 is do or do not, there is no try. This is fairly high on my list, and because I think the ones after it, I think haven't been explored as frequently. I did a post for this on StarWars.com. I've talked about it on several shows, but ultimately what do or do not, there is no try means is don't give lip service to something. If you say you're going to do it, then actually do it with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind. Commit physically, mentally, and emotionally, spiritually to what you're going to do, the goals you're going to have. And the bigger the task, the more that you're going to have to put into that. Luke is not interested per se. I'll give it a try. He's exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
He's tired. I don't think he's fully convinced that Yoda can take him where he thinks he needs to go. So that's why he says, I'll give it a try. And Yoda's like, come on, are you kidding me? Just do it or don't. But don't say you're going to try. Give your best, give your all. As educators, this is something that we can relate to. And as parents too, we know what Yoda is saying here. And I like that this is a commonly kind of misquoted concept, but it's a very, very important, very, very powerful one.
Yeah.
I love that because it ties right into my number 4.
Yay. Great.
I love it when a plan works out. And there was something that leads to, Dan, and it's when after Yoda lifts that up, that let me be a little more specific, the X-Wing out of the swamp, and he sets it down, and Luke goes, I can't believe it. And Yoda goes, that is why you failed. I love that. And that takes me to my next one, to my next teachable moment. And that is the importance of learning from our elders. How many times, Luke is rushing and he's like, I'm looking for a great Jedi. I'm looking for a warrior. I'm looking for this. And by no means is he looking for an elderly, in this case, alien, but, an elderly person. And he thinks that what a waste of time. Yoda can't teach me anything, blah, blah, blah. And we see throughout all of the wisdom that Yoda passes on to him. Now, what I think is interesting is much of the training is very physical, where I feel like most of the training is very mental for Luke, between Yoda and Luke. And it's those moments when they're sitting down or resting or whatever it is, they're, in between those physical moments or right before the cave, when the most important things happen. And it takes me to like the times when I'd sit down with my grandparents, and I was all too young to understand some of the things that they were sharing with me. And I look at Luke and I think about the conclusion of the film, as Dan, you've mentioned already, that, it ends dark. It does not go the way of the rebellion or of Luke as a learning Jedi or Padawan, I suppose. But I feel like if Luke would have taken time to listen to his elder, that maybe things would have turned out a little differently. But that's the story and that's the growth. And so the lesson I take from that, and that I like to pass on, is that, and of course, becoming an elder in my years, I feel like it's important to listen to me. No, I'm just kidding. But I do believe that a lesson to learn here is it is important to learn from the elders.
Excellent. And you're not elder, but we will listen to you because you're wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I try.
Well, see my number 5 for that one. Don't try. All right, Colby, what's your number 4?
Well, this is working out wonderfully, gentlemen, because I am taking the opposite look at that dynamic that Tom just talked about. And
Good.
The moment that I'm talking about is when Obi-Wan and Yoda are trying desperately to prevent Luke from leaving. Luke has had this vision. He loves his friends. He wants to go off and save them. And Obi-Wan and Yoda are throwing everything they can at him to try to get him to stay. And the lesson that I saw the most recent time I watched the movie, I looked at it from Obi-Wan and Yoda's perspective, and I thought to myself, they need to trust him. They need to trust Luke in this situation. They are sitting there in their old frame of mind. And let me preface this with saying, I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. I love Yoda. Today, as I sit in front of you guys right now, Obi-Wan's my number one favorite Star Wars character. Ask me tomorrow, could be Ahsoka, could be Luke, could be. But right now, Obi-Wan Kenobi, love him. I hold him in high esteem. But when I most recently watched the movie, I saw these characters in the fullness of the character. All of the Clone Wars, all of episode 1 and 2 and 3 were embodied by them in this scene. And I just saw that dogmatic approach of the Jedi that was ultimately their downfall. Don't do what you're doing, Luke. It's different and it's new and it's not the way to go. They didn't trust him. And we know, we have the benefit of knowing, because we've seen them all, that his way actually was the right way. Going after his friends because he loved them ultimately led him down the path of redeeming Darth Vader, because he left that situation, because he didn't finish his training. So my angle was, as mentors, teachers, as parents, or as coaches, we do need to trust our students. We need to trust they're not always going to get things right, and that's okay. But we need to trust the process and have the faith that their failure will teach them too. Like Yoda talks to Luke about in The Last Jedi. Because ultimately the love that Luke Skywalker had for his friends ended up being the right thing. It led him down the right path, and Obi-Wan and Yoda couldn't see it because they just didn't have that trust in him quite yet.
Well said.
Nice.
Well, great perspectives as always. And and as you listening to the show, if you think of these, be sure to include yours in the CW Cafe. If there's anything that we don't bring up, or point you want to make to reiterate what we said, or just kind of go in a different direction. We like that so much. This one, my number 4 is, don't judge people by their appearance. Of course, a lot of this is going to tie into Yoda scenes, because there's a lot of incredibly powerful, teachable moments in the scenes with the great teacher of Star Wars, Yoda, and then Luke Skywalker, who is, by all accounts, kind of a very mediocre teacher, but I think that's okay. We'll explore that in other shows, but we talked about it in the Book of Boba Fett a little bit. But for this, famous line, in fact, Colby's wearing the shirt right now, judge me by my size, do you? Right? Mm-hmm. And he says as well, you should not, for my ally is the Force. And Luke underestimates Yoda frequently at first, because he thinks now, to be fair, Yoda does sell it really well with his heel turn, WWE language there, folks, where he acts like he's just some silly, whimsical creature that just wants to destroy things and be silly and eat root leaf stew. But in fact, he is not that. He is actually the great, powerful Jedi Master Yoda, the legendary one. For 800 years, he teaches Jedi. But Luke underestimates that at first. And I think it's fair to say that even until until Yoda raises the X-Wing out of the swamp, Luke is still sort of undermining or not really giving full credit to who Yoda is. And that might be part of Yoda's design anyway. It's not like Luke can watch the Hollows and see Yoda in action, because they didn't have that. That wasn't an option. But it's great. So that's my number 4. Don't judge people by their appearance. And I think it's done extraordinarily well through Tolkien's, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Even the smallest person can make a difference. Really powerful stuff. Okay, Tom.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
That's a great one. I'm going to shift gears here, and talk a little bit about Han and Leia and the lesson that love is patient.
Interesting.
With the slick Han Solo gets what he wants. He's sort of a buffoon, but he's confident, he's cocky. But when it comes to Princess Leia, or Leia, I suppose, he takes a different. Well, I shouldn't say he takes a different. He's forced to take a different approach, and he makes the advance when they're fixing the Falcon, and she's like, "Excuse me," and and then 3PO jumps in, and it forces him to sort of pull back, and then he takes a different advance on Cloud City, and treats her with a different type of respect. And there's a part of me that thinks he looks at Lando and is like, "Oh, Lando's a player. He's making advances on my girl, and he doesn't go that way." But what it teaches us, I suppose, is that love isn't something you jump into. Love is something that is gradual. And boy, I don't know. I don't know that I was ever going to talk about love in the context of Star Wars. But when I sat back and I really looked at their relationship from A New Hope clear to The Rise of Skywalker, this is an important moment in their relationship, this film, their time on Cloud City. And I really feel like they learn to be patient with one another. I love you. I know. One of the classic, laughers in Empire when you're so stressed and you're so worried for Han Solo and he drops that line and you're just comic relief and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened." And then now I can't believe what I'm about to see. But Han Solo being forced to slow down and see Leia for a human being, someone that he's falling in love with, I think is a great lesson that can be learned here.
I debated trying to figure out a way to put those two in my list. That was good. That was interesting. You just want to do a Han Solo impression. Very good.
I wore the black vest for a reason.
Oh, attaboy. All right, Colby, what about you for number 3?
Well, first of all, Tom, I don't appreciate you cheating off of my notes because you've obviously been looking at my notes because we are just going point for point, I think, pretty much similar themes because my number 3 is I Love You, I Know. But I'm taking a little bit of a different look at it because I thought of it from Leia's perspective. So much of that quote is always, "Oh, Han Solo knocks it out of the park. That's just perfect." But I thought about it from Leia's perspective. Through the whole movie up to this point, she spends this entire movie basically fighting with Han Solo, fighting with him. He's acting like a third grader through most of it, right? And then all of a sudden he gets charming and things go differently. And then he starts acting like a third grader again. I remember when they're trying to get out of the space slug and they're running. They're panicking because this thing's about to eat them. And Han wants to get the ship out of it. And she's saying, the Empire is still out there. And he goes, "We don't have enough time to talk about this by committee." And she answers, "I'm not a committee." She's just pound for pound. She's just stepping in there with him and going blow for blow. But when we get to the point of I Love You, I Know, she's about to lose him. This is a terrible situation. A situation that no one can see that they're going to get out of. There's no way out. Darth Vader is there. Stormtroopers are there. The Cloud City, the Bespin police are there. And there's no way out. Han Solo is gone. In her mind, he's gone. There's no way that she knows how she can save him. And I feel like in that moment, the threat of losing him galvanizes her feelings. And she resolutely, without question, looks at him and says, "I love you." She didn't give any indication through the whole movie that was coming, but at the thought of losing him, she took that moment and did everything she could with it and told him how she felt. Without the aspect of the prospect of losing him, I don't know if that happens. I don't know if she at least communicates that. So I just think it drives home the point of really things getting serious, and we become very honest with ourselves when someone that we love is about to be lost, and she doesn't miss that chance to tell him about it.
There's a lot there to unpack, which is that the scene. Another one I think that sometimes, like you said, Colby, sort of misinterpreted at times too, because I agree with you. The whole time she's fighting him, but she's also very much fighting with herself and fighting her feelings. And I've always liked the idea that when he is frozen, they are both thawed because their ice around their hearts melt and they're able to love. which is neat.
Yeah.
My number 3 is a bit of a tricky one. I'll try to explain it the best I can. It is trust your feelings, but don't trust your feelings, because choices have weight and consequence. The Jedi are always saying, stretch out with your feelings, but it's Luke's feelings that cause a lot of problems for him. And he gets this vision about his friends dying in a city in the clouds, and Yoda seemingly on the surface is sort of indifferent. Like, yeah, well, they might, but if you run out, you're going to basically waste everything that they suffered for. Everything that they fought for will be for nothing because of you being impetuous. And he's like, no, this is how I feel. This is what I'm going to do. Often in life, when we just let our feelings drive the vehicle that is us as people, that can get us into trouble. But if you do have these things that you're going to do, you got to remember that your choices have weight and consequence. We've got signs all over the school. I know I've told students plenty of times, don't make a permanent decision for a temporary emotion. And that, in a way, is sort of what Luke does, isn't it? Now, you can't really blame him, let's be honest. If we had a feeling our family and friends were suffering and we thought we could do something about it and we could move rocks with our minds and flip around and wield lightsabers, we would probably feel pretty brash. And a lot of that's the impetuous tenacity of youth also. But they warn him repeatedly. Very wise people warn him, don't do this. This isn't the right time. It's going to cause more problems for you than anything else. And it does. I mean, I think you could even argue, would Han Solo be necessarily frozen if Luke wasn't on his way? He wanted to test it. We're going to test it on Han Solo. Now, it's not Luke's fault. It's Vader's fault. But I think you can make a case for that conceivably not happening if Luke didn't give into his feelings, because those choices have weight and consequence.
Yeah. You really spoke some things there that have been on my mind about just about the patience and whatnot. I like that point about, would Han have been frozen without Luke being on his way? I've thought about that a lot. And I think that's what I meant when I was talking about, if Luke would have sat tight and completed his training with Yoda, I mean, obviously bad things would have happened to Luke and Leia and Chewbacca and the crew. Vader probably would have taken them or held them hostage. Who knows? I mean, who knows?
Or maybe even killed them.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe worse would have happened. So many different ways to go with that. But I'm really appreciating this conversation, because when preparing for this, it made me think of The Empire Strikes Back in whole different ways. I was trying to deconstruct what I know about the film, and you guys are really giving me a lot to think about. And so hope everybody else is enjoying it as much as I am. So shall I jump into number 2?
I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll give our top 2 things that The Empire Strikes Back teaches us. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We are back talking about the top 5 things that The Empire Strikes Back teaches us. And Tom, I believe we are back to you with your number 2 choice.
My second choice, not my second choice, my number 2 choice is goes back to my 3 was love is patient. My number 2 also has patience involved with it, and that is that learning requires patience. And again, I go back to Luke on Dagobah with Yoda. He is so impatient. He wants to, and I said this already earlier, so it kind of ties into learning from our elders, but there's more of a focus on Luke and his impatience. Wants to know where the Jedi Master is. Then I can learn. I've done this, all that. And he has that argument, and he bickers, and he bumps his head inside Yoda's hut. And then you go to the cave. And I'm not sure. You have to help me out on this one, because Dan, you've done the essay and you've done the really deep thinking on the cave. But when Yoda says weapons you will not need, or whatever the quote is, Luke puts it back on, takes his belt and sort of scoffs and puts the belt back on. And I'm never sure if that is impatience or if it's fear, or maybe it's a little bit of all of that. But I feel like, when he goes into the cave, the results of the cave are his impatience and not taking time to really fully consider. He's rushing through it. And so who does he see? He sees himself. He's his own enemy. And I don't know, I'm going to stop talking there because I want to hear what you have to say about that. But to me, that all ties into the lesson of you can't just learn this, whatever it is, overnight. It takes the learning, it takes the practice, it takes the mastery, and then you can do. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a great point, because a lot of learning, growing pains are difficult. That's often you will see some students that it's easier just to give up and then to suffer and to fall down and have to pick yourself up again and feel like you don't understand how to do something. So that's a very human aspect of this, for sure. The other parts, ironically, you may have to exercise a little Jedi patience, because it might come back to one of my remaining two on my list.
Oh, I am willing to hold. I am willing to wait. I will not leave and try to rescue my friends. I'm going to wait for this one.
Oh, look at that. Outstanding. Colby, what's your second one? Number 2.
Before I get to my number 2, I also would add to Luke taking those weapons into the cave as disbelief. He straight out does not believe Yoda. Yoda tells him, "You're not going to need those." He puts them on anyway, and he walks in. So that's definitely a part of his learning curve too, right? The learning to believe his elder or his teacher.
Kids
my number
never think they know more than their teachers or parents. What do you mean?
Right. Never.
Oh, I see the sarcasm light came on. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding.
But was it red or just orange? I don't think it was that bad.
It's a good question.
So my number 2 is also Luke and Yoda. This movie is, I tried really hard actually to try not to use too much of these two characters in their scenes, but really the meat of this movie really is these two guys. So, but with that being said, my number 2 is when they first meet, their first encounter. And I always laugh when that happens. In the past, I've watched it and it's, Yoda's acting all weird and you think, hey, wait a minute, does he recognize R2 and does R2 know him? And all these things are going on. And then he starts beating R2 with a stick and it's just fun. It's a fun little scene, but I sort of watched it with different eyeglasses on today. And I watched Luke Skywalker, and I wanted to yell at him, just listen. So that's my number 2. Listen. He's impatient, like you said. He's borderline disrespectful. At one point, he calls Yoda's home a mud hole. He even refers to Yoda as little one. And it made me chuckle. He literally called Yoda little one. And I'm like, buddy, if you only knew who you're talking to. But he just wasn't into any of that. He was so focused on his goal and not being aware of his surroundings and being patient, listening. And it really ties into a big theme, I think, in the movie, because if most of our heroes would just listen to each other, so much could have been different. Han Solo ignores C-3PO through the whole movie. 3PO is just trying to tell him about the hyperdrive, which would have helped them from the get-go. Doesn't give him the time of day. Even 3PO then later on ignores R2 when R2 is trying to tell him they deactivated the hyperdrive. But no one is giving anyone the time of day, and just chaos ensues because they're not listening. But I think Luke's experience with Yoda right from the outset, what would it have looked like? And I know Luke isn't quite ready for this in his character arc, but I just think it's a lesson to be learned. We need to listen to each other. Many, many bad things can be prevented if we do.
Love that. Yeah, this after hearing you both explain your top 5s, I'm thinking this could easily be a top 10.
Yeah,
because like both of you, I tried really hard to just vary this up, but it seems like everything on my list has to do with Luke and Yoda. It really does. But there are so many other things you can unpack, and as you mentioned, Tom, with Han and Leia, and what we're talking about now, Colby. So it's a really rich movie. I mean, it's no secret that, especially if you're of a certain age, The Empire Strikes Back is the original trilogy Star Wars movie. And that's not against any of the others, but it's just that good. Lawrence Kasdan, big part of that, as well as Irving Kershner. My number 2 is similar to what both of you have mentioned earlier. It is simply trust your teachers and mentors. Trust them. You may feel like you have another direction. It doesn't mean it's not credible or valid, but wisdom and experience can only be afforded through age, through your teachers, through your mentors' experiences themselves. You can be as talented or as gifted, as you have been made to be, as hard as you have worked. But it would be a detriment to you to ignore people that have gone before you and have blazed those trails and paved those paths for you. You may have a different approach to how you want to walk down them, but you've got to trust. You got to trust. Luke has to trust Yoda. He has to trust Obi-Wan. I mean, C-3PO is he older than Han? He's not older than Han, but C-3PO has his own experience, right? He's certainly not a mentor or a teacher to Han, but he does have some wisdom to impart. There's a lot of that happens throughout this, and anytime it doesn't happen, bad things usually happen to the heroes, as we've all mentioned. So that's an interesting little dynamic there, but ultimately, trust your teachers and mentors. They actually have your best interests in mind. Their job is not to make you have fun. Their job is to make you better.
Love it.
All right. We're down to number 1, our number 1 thing that The Empire Strikes Back teaches us. Tom, what do you got?
This is one of my favorites, and I absolutely love this one because it pulls into the very end scene with Luke and the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. And that lesson is the power of your friends. How many times in this movie do they count on one another to back each other up? I mean, Luke leaves to save his friends. Han and Leia count on each other, and Chewbacca, when they go out to take the Mynock off of they're watching each other's backs, but all the way to, Lando Calrissian. Now, Lando is in a tough spot, but even Lando, wants to help his friend Han. And these, and he knows Chewbacca, and we know the story now of their background. And so it's a little dicey, but the power of friendship, and how many times that when they all come together and they listen, they listen to one another and they back each other up, it makes amazing things happen. And that, in extending this beyond just The Empire Strikes Back, the power of friendship can even be more powerful than a mechanical army or an army that is, led by some terrible person like Darth Vader, or even more powerful than, the dark side of the Force, and just the unpredictability of the power of friendship. And that's one of the things that I love throughout all of Star Wars. But The Empire Strikes Back was the first time when I looked at that and I was like, these guys are friends. I mean, think about the last scene when they're standing on the medical frigate and, the Falcon is taking off and Luke and Leia are there, and it's the friends, and they've got a plan and they're going forward with it. And you just, even though they lose at the end of Empire Strikes Back, there's still hope. And that hope is put 100% in friends counting on one another. I just love that so much.
That's so great. And, it's that whole thing about found family, right? That Star Wars is so good about doing that. That is a perfect capstone, Mr. Gross.
Thank you.
You bet. Colby, what about you? What did you find is the number 1 thing that the Empire Strikes Back teaches us?
Well, I got to tell you, the power of friendship was on the list, and I had to get rid of something. And that was one of the things that didn't make it. So, like I said in the beginning of the show, when I said, this will be easy. Yeah, it's easy because it gives you so much material to work with. The difficulty is what makes the top 5. And I agree with you, Tom. Power of friendship is massive, beautiful theme in this movie. For me, the number 1 thing that I feel is a teachable moment is also the end. And it's when Luke is laying in his hospital gurney and they're testing his hand, and you see the inside of his wrist and he's moving. And I always thought it was so cool when I was a kid, just how does that work? It looks so real, and it's just clicking back and forth. And it occurred to me, he started this movie in a hospital gurney. He's ending the movie in a hospital gurney. He got beat up by the Wampa. Han went out there in an act of friendship, going and saving him in the cold. And that's how we started out the movie with him. And here we are at the end. He's back being sewn up, patched up, by some droid. And the idea that I got was keep moving forward. Every single one of our heroes in this movie is decimated in one way or the other. We've talked about it. It's not new about The Empire Strikes Back. Us as fans are gutted because our heroes are just in such a low place. But Luke is healed. Leia is there by his side. They're literally talking about, don't worry, we're going to find Han. The plan is already in motion. Chewie and Lando are in the Falcon. They're disengaging and they're off. This was who knows how long after Luke Skywalker was hanging, his hand missing off of the bottom of Cloud City, having just gotten the worst news he could have ever gotten, that the most evil character in the story was his father. But these guys don't let it keep them where they are. They get knocked down. They did not stay there. They're moving forward. And I just think that is, I know so many of us look at Empire Strikes Back as just being such a difficult story to swallow because of where our heroes are left. But I find such optimism and hope in that last scene when Luke gets off of that bed and walks over with Leia and they're staring out at that beautiful solar system. Lando and Chewie are off looking for Han, and the plan continues to move forward. They don't let it stop. And, to quote Rocky, life's going to hit you hard, but you got to get back up. And they do this. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful moment.
It is a beautiful moment. And I'm sure you both saw that on Mark Hamill's Instagram recently. He talked about how they shot that scene weeks after I think they had wrapped, because they wanted to add a little bit of hope and optimism at the end of this and not completely take the wind out of all of our sails. And obviously it worked. So very cool. That's a great one, Colby.
Cool.
My top one, The Empire Strikes Back teaches us, is only what you take with you. This is, you had mentioned earlier, Tom, this thing about the belt. So in that sequence, I sense cold, death, the dark side. Yoda says, you sense the dark side. What's in there? And Yoda says, only what you take with you. Your weapons, you will not need them. So Luke looks at Yoda and then looks back at the cave, and he just has this hunch that he's going to need protection. So he puts his belt on, he walks into the cave, and then what does he find? He finds chaos, confusion, an uncertain literal and figurative future, and death in the form of Darth Vader, who, when he cuts into Vader's helmet, it explodes, and he ultimately realizes, whoa, wait, that's me. That's me. So what does that mean? To me, and this is to me, what this sequence means is we are the authors of our own book. You self-actualize, you put into the world certain things, and they come back to you. If you go into a situation looking for a confrontation, looking to be disappointed, looking to have an argument, then guess what? The odds are pretty high that that's what's going to happen. And that is what happens to Luke. I am convinced that if he walked in there without any lightsaber, without a blaster, Vader would not be waiting for him. The dark side feeds on your fears, your anxieties, your insecurities, and modifies and enhances them to such a degree that in some ways you make it come to fruition. And I think that is what happens there. In this world of social media and anxiety and sometimes emotional unrest that we all have, what if we decided not to take those things into there, but took the path of peace, not of least resistance, because you got to take care of yourself. But there are other ways to do it that don't involve aggression and anxiety and this reaction mode. If you come from a place of lack or come from a place of reaction, then you are going to be anxious. You are going to put your fists up, and you might misread a situation that it could actually be something that you could learn from. I didn't think this was going to be my number one, but as I was thinking about this earlier today, it seemed like it was the only option for me.
Nice. It brings a lot of clarity to that scene for me. And you and I, Dan, we've talked over the years about how this scene, and I don't think I'm alone in how this cave scene is mystifying, I suppose would be a good way to put it. And you just really kind of, I don't know, people can't see, it's a podcast, but I've been scrying down notes as you've talked, and it just really kind of helps me to kind of ground myself in what happened there. So I truly appreciate that. Learning moment, I just got one.
Oh, I'm glad. That's wonderful. So, gentlemen, anything you want to add, honorable mentions, things that sort of hit you throughout our conversations, or other ideas you had that you haven't maybe brought up yet as we wrap things up?
I'll start with, I guess I'll say a couple things. One, I have two observations and then one question, because I know there's something to learn from it. I just don't know what it is. And I've got two really smart people that I'm talking to tonight, so I'm going to bring it up. But the two that really struck me that you guys are talking about is, Colby, when you talked about listening, anytime. That is what a educational moment. You always have to stop and listen. I really appreciated the comments you had there. And then Dan, I think it was you who were talking about trusting your teachers. And sometimes that trusting your teachers is knowing who those teachers are. It doesn't have to be a traditional setting where you're going to a school or a college, university, whatever. Your teachers are everywhere in your life, and recognizing first who they are, and then second of all, trusting them. I really appreciate that. And so here's my question. Maybe we save this and we put it out there for the Alliance to take a look at. But I wrote down this, and I just didn't know how to approach it. And that is Vader revealing who he is to Luke. I know that there's a learning moment there. I just don't know what it is. So do what you will with that.
What do you think, Colby?
I put a lot of thought into that scene too, and one of the things that I noticed is that is just, of course he's telling him the truth, but that is just one more tool in his belt of trying to tempt Luke into what he wants Luke to do. And I thought it was so interesting that he followed it up with, "You are going to destroy the Emperor. The Emperor has seen it." So he just told him that he's his father. He's now telling him that the two of them together will be able to destroy the biggest evil in the galaxy. And the whole time, Luke is looking around him. After he first hears that the Emperor, he can destroy the Emperor, he sort of pauses, and you can see the temptation in his face. But then shortly after that, he starts looking around, and he's looking for a new way. He's looking for a way out. And Vader then says to him, "This is the only way." And then Luke jumps off the side of the thing. And again, just another example of Luke Skywalker finding a new way and not looking at what someone is telling him that this is the only way. So to me, it's just another part of the temptation of the dark side, and the way Luke Skywalker is able to react to that.
Definitely. And it's also, it's not the matter, it's the manner. Like, yes, Vader is telling the truth from a certain point of view, from his point of view, because his purpose is not to enlighten or to empower. His purpose is to manipulate and to mislead and misguide. You can set the path to destruction and fill it with all kinds of chocolate cake and sweet candies and yummy hot chocolates and things like that. But at the end of the day, what is the final goal of the person who's working with you or trying to persuade you in some way, shape, or form? What is their intent? What is their purpose? His only purpose is, and we can, that scene has been dissected, thousands of times. and we've kind of retroactively added meaning into it. But at the core, when it was first created, this was purely a manipulation device. And we see later that Vader does have a moment of, a very brief moment of reflection, perhaps a very quick and instantaneous, but then reversal of his heart. You know, he does seem legitimately sad, that Luke is gone, but he goes down to hunting him down like he's prey.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem. You know, evil, the path to evil is laid with good intentions, as we know, and Vader is public enemy number one as far as that goes.
Cool.
Great stuff. Colby, anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, just two quick things that I noticed was in the beginning of the movie in the Hoth scene. Wow, it's just really, it does a really good job of illustrating the brutality of war. So here we are looking at the space fantasy. It's called Star Wars, but boy, they do a good job of putting a face on the people that are sacrificing their lives in this. You know, we hear Luke talking to Dak as he's getting into the vessel to go out and fight the AT-ATs, and next thing we know, Dak's gone. They put a name on him. They gave him a face. We get a couple of seconds with him. Earlier in the movie, Rogue 2 is going out and he finds Han and Luke. And then later on, we see him flying next to Luke and we get a dramatic scene of his death. And the beginning, well, the whole movie really is brutal in a lot of aspects. And I think it does a very good job of really highlighting the fact that war is ugly. We don't want this. We don't want this conflict, and we shouldn't want it. The other thing that that was on my list was faith, and specifically when Yoda says to Luke that my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. You can't see the Force. You can't touch the Force. You can learn about the Force, and you can choose to believe in the Force. And Yoda is telling Luke that Force is his ally, and he knows that it's fact. It's it goes beyond belief. Yoda knows it's fact, and his faith in that Force is based on fact. And I think that that's an important and beautiful lesson to be learned.
It is. This is a really rich movie for a lot of reasons we've mentioned and others we haven't even considered. So please let us know in the CWK Cafe what you think are some of the most important learning moments in The Empire Strikes Back. And for more insightful and entertaining conversation, you have Tom and Corey's podcast. So Tom, let us know about Teachers in the Dungeon, where they can find it and where they can find you.
Oh, absolutely. Teachers in the Dungeon is, you can find our show on Anchor, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, just about any place you go. You just put in Teachers in the Dungeon, and I believe you will find us. On social media, on Twitter, we are at Dungeon Teachers, and then Instagram and Facebook, Teachers in the Dungeon. Me personally, catch me on Twitter at Draftline, DRAFTLINE.
And Colby, the Colby Cast had a really exciting debut. I was very fortunate enough to be on the first episode, and I know that some other members of the Coffee with Kenobi family are going to be on future episodes as well. Please let us know where they can find that and where they can get in touch with you.
Yep, the Colby Cast. We're up and running. We're having fun. I'm really, really excited about it. So you can find us in all the same places that Tom just mentioned: Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Just probably the best place to find me right now is on Twitter at the Colby Cast. Also on Instagram at the Colby Cast. It's all spelled out just like you would think it would be. And I am going to make sure that all the links are out there for everybody to be able to listen. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell everybody about it. As far as for me, you can find my personal Twitter and Instagram at crosschecked3. 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 Number 3.
So you got a personal Twitter account that's related to cycling and one that's related to hockey. I love it. All right. Well, hey, guys, thanks again so much for joining me on Coffee with Kenobi.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.